And welcome to our first COTI conversation of the 25-26 season. We're glad to have you with us today. My name is Bill Millar, and I am the president of the COTI board for this year. And with me are several members of the COTI board who actually made this thing happen today. So I want to see if I can get COTI board members like Barbara here in front and others to stand up just for a second so we can all say thanks for your hard work on me. And I really appreciate that. And also, not to brag on friends in high places, but a former COTI board member, in fact, president for many years, is the current mayor of Sanibel. And I'd like to ask Mike Miller to be recognized with those cards. And I didn't see any other council members come in that I noticed, but if you're here, thank you. If you're not, I know you wish us well. And everybody else who thinks they should be recognized, do recognize yourself. We're very happy that you're with us today. One ground rule you should know about ahead of time, and that is that we are recording this on Zoom, and our plan is then to put it on the COTI website and allow people who were not able to join us today to take a look at the presentation that's here. Now I'm going to take a wild guess, just looking around the audience and some of the earlier discussion, that virtually everybody here knows who COTI is. But on the off chance that there's somebody who doesn't, I will say that COTI is, of course, standing for the words Committee of the Islands. We were founded some 51 years ago by residents of the newly incorporated city of Sanibel to help keep development from overrunning the island. Now, we do this in a variety of ways. We monitor the actions of the City Council and the Planning Commission. We participate actively in civic and nonpartisan political life of the island. We hold educational sessions such as the one that you're about to witness today to inform our members and the publics on issues and opportunities to preserve our community by protecting our natural environment as we share our island with visitors from around the world. Now, I mentioned members because we do our work, we need to have the active support of residents and visitors alike. If you're not yet a COTI member, I would encourage you to become one by either signing up at the registration table that you enjoyed earlier today, or by going online to our website at COTI.org. That's COTI.org. Our annual membership started at just $35. So that's the end of my advertising for the moment. We do hope you'll join us formally if you haven't had a chance to do that, or if maybe we've slipped your mind and you want to renew, we'd love to have you as a renewal member as well. Now, COTI cooperates with many of the civic-minded organizations on our island to carry out our mission. Today, we draw upon the staff of the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, probably you know it as SCCF, for our program. And I'd like to thank my colleague, James Evans, the CEO of SCCF, for loaning us his community conservation coordinator, Skye McDonald Newman, to be our speaker today. Now, Skye was raised between the tide pools of Upper Captiva and the mountain farm in West Virginia. And so she had a chance to develop an early appreciation for the intersections among land, water, and community. Skye holds a BA degree in environmental studies from Mount Holyoke College and has conducted field research in Panama, Ecuador, and the exotic place of Massachusetts. Before joining the SCC staff, among other things, she worked for the Ding Darling Wildlife on Wheels program, the WOW program that carries our environmental message to many elementary schools throughout Lake County. Now, she'll be discussing the importance of mangroves to the protection and resilience of our island paradise, and how you can participate in their expansion and and protection by becoming a mangrove mama or a papa goolie, papa, as my wife Barbara and I have done. And Papa Gula, well, whatever, I got close. I didn't kill them, I raised them and they did good, and they've now been planted wherever they got planted this year. So anyway, she'll tell you more about that and perhaps even how it's pronounced. I don't know. Like that. After the presentation, there'll be a short, or not a short, could be long, who knows, but a Q&A session. So think of, as she's making her presentation, what you'd like to know more about. So again, welcome. We're glad to have you with us, and please join me in welcoming Skye McDonald Newman to the podium. There we go.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction and for having me here at COTI. What an honor. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited to be talking to you all about mangroves on Sanibel Island. At SCCF, we do research with our marine lab as well as restoration with our Coastal Watch program. So we're there for a whole lot of the process, and I'm excited to talk to you about it today. So we'll be talking about the mangroves that are native to Sanibel Island specifically, the importance of these mangroves to ecology as well as humans in Southwest Florida. And then we'll talk about the threats to mangroves that we're seeing, SCCF Marine Lab research, what is being done currently and what has been done in the past, our lessons from hurricanes. We might talk about that all the way through because that is something that we deal with a lot here on Sanibel. And then we'll talk about our Coastal Watch restoration programs and how the community can be directly involved in the restoration that we are doing at SCCF Coastal Watch. Okay, so the global distribution of mangroves tends to be between 25 degrees north and south. So we do have a few exceptions to this rule. Florida tends to be one. And we do see the expansion going northwards. So in areas like, has anybody been to New Smyrna? New Smyrna Beach on the East Coast? Yeah. Okay, so if you were there about 30 years ago, most of what was over there was Spartina marsh, and it looked probably more like the Carolinas. Now what we see is a forest with a whole bunch of trees that are about 30 years old because they all expanded northwards at about a similar time. Now we see this happen because as temperatures warm globally, we see the areas that plants are allowed to grow expanding northwards. Now this means that we do have more areas with mangroves, but we are losing critical Spartina marshes in areas as well. We also see this with rising water as well as hurricanes. We see mangroves in areas that they were never before because their distribution through the water column is allowed to go to more areas because of the rising water. Okay, so we have 3 mangroves in Florida. This is when I start roaming, Bob. I'm so sorry. If I can get this out. Oh my gosh. I'm breaking it. Oh, I got it. I got it. Okay. So we have 3 types of mangroves in Southwest Florida, and I've got a whole bunch of volunteers from my nursery here today. So you guys can't cheat. You have to let somebody else say what they might do. We're gonna start with the hardest, this mangrove. Does everybody know what this one is? This is our white mangroves. So white mangroves are they're more difficult because they grow more tree-like and they have a lot of phenotypic differences, right? So they can look like a tree, they can look like a bush, they can look like a stick on the side of Wildlife Drive that you're like, oh my goodness, what is that? But how you tell a white mangrove is it has a heart-shaped leaf. So there at the very top is a small indentation that some scientists at some point decided looked like a heart-shaped leaf. Now, why in the world they decided to continue that everywhere, I have no idea, but we call this a heart-shaped leaf. Now, the white mangrove is really cool because it does grow more, it likes drier feet, so it grows more where you see maybe a buttonwood or a more traditional upland tree, and more in that kind of intermediate area. But it also has nectar nodes at the base of each leaf that puts out a ton of glucose at any given time. I had what I thought was a very clever idea last year where I thought we could do white mangrove Christmas trees in all of the island businesses. And I started with Sanibel Ski School, and in about a week, the whole tree was covered in sugar and it was sticky to the touch. So if that gives you any clue of just how much these little plants are helping the bug life and pollinators around the island. Well, it should, because this one, it doesn't have any sugar on it right now, which means that it was crawling before, which is pretty cool. Okay, so now this one, does anybody? This is our black mangrove. So black mangroves you can differentiate because they have more of an arrow-shaped leaf, and then they also have a silver underside. If you look at them in a beach area, like if you go, like with a tour up to Cayo Costa, where you can see black mangroves right on the beach, they actually have salt crystals right on the back there, and the Calusa used to use these to salt their food. But if you find one in a really, really salty area, you can scrape it off the back and it's like kosher salt. It's really cool. Now these ones are also cool because they have nematophores. Can't really, but they're essentially these little zombie fingers that come up out of the ground. And it's an adaptation that allows them to survive in anaerobic soils. So these are areas where the soil is flooded pretty frequently or consistently. When it's so essentially there's water sitting on top of this soil, and roots need oxygen to breathe, right? You need oxygen exchange to survive as a plant. So they put up these little snorkel roots and it allows them to breathe. If anybody's been to 6 Mile cypress trees have the same function. They have the same nematophores that go up, and they're called, for cypress trees, I think they call them knobbly knees. And they look really cool and they look like the knees of the trees. Well, it's the same function, nematophore. It's a super cool word. If you're ever playing Scrabble, you should automatically win if you figure out how to get nematophore in there because it's a really good one. But yeah, these are cool trees because they also grow in our black mangrove basins, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then we have our charismatic tree at the end. This is our red mangrove. So this is our fringing mangrove that you will see if you go out fishing. If anybody was snook fishing in the last snook fishing season, I think it ended a week ago, 2 weeks ago. I don't know. I guess we don't have so many snook fishermen here. Okay. So these are all of our fringing mangroves. These are the ones where you'll also see oysters growing along the roots. They'll do a lot of our erosion prevention because they have so many legs. They're called walking trees. So they look like that big gobbly mess out on the forest. So they have all the legs going everywhere and everything growing in there. These are great hatcheries for fish. And a lot of the fish that we consume in the US as well as other countries are actually going through their juvenile phases amongst the legs of the red mangroves. They're usually in estuary areas, so this is an area that doesn't have that super high salinity of the ocean, so it's a little bit easier on fish eggs and juvenile fish, but then it also allows them to be protected within these roots. Because if you're a snook hunting along the side of the mangrove roots, you can't quite get in there, so a little tiny fish can stay protected. And then they can also eat whatever's growing along the roots of the mangrove, right? If you have oysters growing along these roots down in Panama, we get a lot of sponges, a lot of different things growing along these roots that those fish can then consume. And it ends up being a really rich habitat. Down in Brazil, a lot of the indigenous communities maintain their livelihoods just based off of the roots of the red mangroves. And in places where they're super healthy, scientists will actually, to test what they're doing, they'll literally cut off a whole leg and then they'll measure what's growing on there, which is really cool. We don't like to do that in Florida because our mangroves are more endangered than places like Panama. In Panama, your mangroves can grow as much as they want and there's no storms and not as much development and it's just beautiful mangrove heaven. And yeah, we'll talk about, okay, so they all have, so they all give live birth. So this is called vivipary, which means that they don't germinate external of the plant. They germinate on the plant and then they fall to the ground. This allows them to immediately take root wherever they are. And this is an adaptation so that they can find their home and wherever they're going to be immediately as they're leaving that tree. Now, when we're talking about something like a red mangrove, And I should have brought a coffee cup. It's sort of a coffee deal. This one's already rooted out and has its leaves on it. But this base part right here, it looks like green bean or cigar. And when it falls from the tree, because it's herbivorous, because it's already germinated, it literally can fall down and like a dart germinate and start rooting in wherever it is. And about 99.99% of mangroves will actually root in below the canopy of that parent plant, which is pretty cool. Okay, so this we kind of talked about a little bit already. We have our fringing mangroves or red mangroves. These are the ones that will protect most from tidal influence from water. They'll take the brunt of everything, and they have those legs so that they can absorb all of wave and wind energy that, you know, the ocean has to grow with them. And then we have black mangroves. So black mangroves can grow like this on the slope, but they can also grow when there's a berm right here. They can grow in what we call a black mangrove basin. We have a ton of these in Ding Darling Wildlife Refuge. They're amazing. They have a wonderful odor that lets you know exactly when you're in one. But they're really cool because they have that little berm. That's why that water sits on them more consistently. A red mangrove will be in a tidal area, so the water will go in and go out. But if you have a berm that's holding it like a pool, it gets super saline. And then it pools there for longer. So only a king tide or really high tide will flush that water. And that's why those black mangroves will actually be your most salt tolerant mangrove that we have. And it's really cool because they actually intake that salinity as well, instead of excluding it like our red mangroves do. Red mangroves actually use reverse osmosis, similar to what we have in our refrigerators or sinks in our houses. But it's naturally born in those red mangroves, which is really cool. Okay, so we also already talked a lot about our adaptations, but we have our physical stability from those crop roots. You can see that they start them really high too. This allows if a part of this tree is broken off too, if this part of the tree dies and this survives, these crop roots will actually act as the roots that allow that tree to survive, even though the original part of the tree might die off, which allows them to, a singular tree in a hurricane can survive even if this main trunk dies. We see this a lot when we're tromping through Ding Darling and looking at trees. If you have a really big mangrove tree that has that huge trunk, but it has crop roots that have created like a separate clone of itself, it will still survive, which is an amazing way that they can still maintain having trees in an area when a hurricane might come and twist the main root. Okay, here's a picture of those three leaves. And reproduction. So that viviparous reproduction is actually a method so that they can go into the water column and disperse themselves, but also grow as quickly as they can between storm seasons. Okay, importance of mangroves in Southwest Florida. So we see this a ton in Ding Darling, right? Everybody on Sanibel, we love our birds, right? Everybody loves birds. Ding Darling, they grow great. This is because of the mangroves of Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. Almost the entirety of the refuge is mangrove swamp. And that's why the birds love it so much. They use the canopy, they eat the oysters that are growing on the roots of the mangroves. Then we also have our scavengers. So I was on Upper Captiva yesterday, actually visiting my uncle, and I was chomping through some mangroves unnecessarily, as one does. And you can actually, in an area where you have tons of white mangroves, you can get those mangrove tree crabs. There'll be so many holes that if you step into the forest, you'll hear them scuttling into their holes, and it's almost like a little murmur. So if you're ever in an area where you're worried to go into a mangrove forest and you see all those little crabs, just don't scare them too much, but just scare them enough so you can hear the little murmur of the mangrove tree crab. It's super cool. Then we have tons of microorganisms that decompose and break down leaf litter. This is actually how we build our islands and our barrier islands. It all starts with a mangrove tree that then releases its organic matter, and all these microorganisms turn that into soil, and then other plants can grow from that soil as well. Then we talked about our fish and our small predators, and then our large predators that then will be consumed by humans. Our fishing industry is getting bigger and bigger in Southwest Florida by the year, especially our tourist fishing industry. So as that increases, we are seeing more and more demand for healthy mangrove ecosystems to provide stock for fishing industry as well as the tourist fishing industry. So it's a huge, huge thing both for our economy, our livelihoods as Southwest Floridians, because we don't exactly want to, be surrounded by waters that don't have any fish and don't have any green space, because that's not why we're here on Sanibel, right? Okay, then they also have a tremendous value in erosion prevention. So in addition to building the islands with their leaf litter, they also have great root mats. So each root that goes down right here creates main roots, and then it has these really fine roots that actually hold a tremendous amount of blue carbon. And they create these root mats that hold the islands together, and it gets really, really thick, really, really dense. In Panama, you can see where the sand meets these root mats, and it literally looks like a really thick carpet under these islands. And when we do a root core, soil core like this, you can actually measure the organic matter being stored in the root systems of mangroves. And it's very different area to area, right? This one is a little bit more sandier. It doesn't have, or it's a little sandier. And it doesn't have those small fine roots. So it really depends on the spot. And then those oysters as well, they take a what would just be kind of a stick, and they hold that sediment in as well and trap pollution. Okay, this is where we're trapping pollution. This is super confusing. We don't have to understand it all. This is Eric Milbrandt created this wonderful, crazy mod podge of chaos. But essentially this talks about microplastics, nutrient pollution from river runoff, from the sun corroding plastics, from tide, from wind erosion, from everything going into these mangrove swamps. And then the mangroves will actually intake this pollution and store it instead of leaving it in the water column. It'll also settle turbid waters. So it'll catch in those areas, and it'll settle any dirt, any sand, any nutrient pollution. And then those oysters will also intake that pollution as well and drop it to the bottom of the water. Okay, so this is a great example of the wave and wind energy that's absorbed by mangroves. You can see they have their wave pool, and then at the end, there's much less. So 40 to 60% of wave energy is absorbed by red mangroves. If you want to get really technical and get the calculation, I can send you a paper that goes really technically through how many feet of mangroves you need for X amount of wave and wind reduction. They have those papers. They're super, super technical. You need a supercomputer to be able to figure out what that is. But if you want to know exactly how many waves are reduced in front of your house based on how many mangroves you have, those papers are available, and I can send them to you. But if you want to just an easy thing to say, it's 40 to 60%. So here we see this in a place like Sanibel, where we have our mangroves and we have more laws about where you can build your houses in relation to the beach and the water. And in places like this is a little deceiving, because when you have a storm surge, your water will still come up. But when you have mangrove trees, what'll happen is your water will come up, but then there won't be a wave on top of that water, right? If you have a storm surge that's X number of feet, but then you also have a wave height of X number of feet, then that's all hitting your house, right? I live right over here in the middle of the island, and when Helene came, the water came up nice and slow, and then the fish came and they swam around, and then the water went down nice and slow. But in places like Fort Myers Beach, where you don't have any vegetation protecting you, you also get that wave height hitting whatever structures you have as well. Okay, mangrove flood protection in Florida. So this is from an older paper from the Nature Conservancy in 2023. We actually have a new report for Collier County that says that $67 million of flood protections are offered by mangroves, specifically in Collier County. It's a super random paper done in conjunction with the University of Santa Cruz and a university in, I think, North Carolina. But it's really interesting. It's a new paper and we're doing more and more of this where we're economically discussing the ecosystem services of different plants and different wildlife so that they can be discussed on the same level as our industry and actually be quantified and validated in court systems. Okay, threats to mangroves and SCCF marine life research. I have no idea how my time's doing, so I have.
You're doing great.
Okay, awesome. So one of the main threats to mangroves in Florida is urban development. What you're looking at here is Cape Coral back in the day in 1960s. So they essentially said, look at all this great land. Let's dig some canals, make some higher ground, and create Venice in Florida and have a grand old time getting around in our boats. But what they didn't realize is that they were uprooting all of the mangroves that were growing here and had a wonderful habitat, and were creating a thriving ecosystem. Now, I joke with my volunteers, and it's actually really sad, but I find that mangroves grown in the adopted mangrove program in Cape Coral actually grow so much better than a lot of the other mangroves that I send out into the community. I joke that this is because it's the ghost of the mangrove forest that has passed. But really, I have a lot of volunteers. They put them out on kayak launches. They put them out in their yards. There is something about Cape Coral, as if the nuclear apocalypse ever happens, Cape Coral is going to be a mangrove forest again so fast. But yes, this is one of the examples of what happened before we put in laws in the 1970s protecting our mangrove forests from destruction like this. Okay, so now we can talk a little bit more about large storms. And I'm gonna try to say hurricane least amount as I can. So I'm gonna say large storms. Maybe heavy winds and heavy waves. So what we found in Hurricane Charlie, oh, I'm sorry. That one just came out. One of the challenges of these large storms is, as a marine lab, you have to have your testing site set up in advance, right? You can't anticipate when this is going to happen. And usually in the amount of time that you have before it happens, you're pretty focused on figuring out what's happening in your own home with your own family, and then also getting all your gear and your lab supplies and everything out of your fridge figured out, right? So you don't really have time to tromp into the mangrove forest and set up a test site. So what we do during these storms is we try to have things set up in advance that then we can look at afterwards and have a broad enough scope that we can look at whatever trends we're seeing, because we don't know if these storms are going to be wind storms, wave storms, whatever, and we don't always know where to do these tests. And then you also, you can go 10 years on end and not have an opportunity to actually use that research. So what they found during Charlie was that, so they had a test set up in eastern and central Sanibel. I don't exactly know where those plots were, but they found that larger trees felt a greater impact because of the wind in Charlie. It actually, because those trees were harder wood and larger, they were twisting more and they were breaking more, whereas smaller trees were actually surviving better because they had more plasticity in their body. So this allowed them to take that wind versus breaking off. Okay, so tidal flushing. They also found after Charlie that tidal flushing was a huge impact on trees and mangrove forests in general. We can see this here. So if you have an area like this with berms on each side, this might be something like a black mangrove basin where this has happened naturally. Over on like Woodring Point, this has happened naturally a little bit, where the sand just pushes up a little bit and you have a little bit of a berm. This can also happen like, I don't know if we call it Summerlin or McGregor. I know people call it both. If you have a road right here and that's cutting off the flushing of your mangrove forest, then what happens after these storms is the water sits on your mangrove forest. And even if this is a black mangrove forest, if this is a red mangrove forest, you can get so much water and such a close-up that water will get super, super saline over time. But what you'll find is right after the storm, it will have survived because it's in a more protected area, right? It's not right on the coast. It's in somewhere a little bit more inland or has that berm to protect it. So they'll survive initially after the hurricane, and then you'll see the collapse afterwards. As that water gets more and more saline, they'll get super, super stressed out and they can't take it. At some point last spring, I was out on the McGregor property that SCCF owns, and I tested a puddle and it was 90 parts per unit salinity, which is more salinity than the Dead Sea, which is really, really bad. The ocean, for perspective, is between 25 to 30 parts per unit salinity. Now, then we have these areas that are more slush. So this might be something like James Darling, where it gets that tidal activity, and you see a higher loss initially, but then you see a faster regeneration, and then also this dead debris material. This is what we mostly see on the island, right? And mostly what we see on islands like the Rookery Islands and islands surrounding Sanibel, is you see that initial collapse and it seems really dramatic and really intense. But a lot of these trees actually come back because they don't have the additional stress of that increased salinity. Okay, seedling production. So we see seedling production in these stress trees after large storms goes down. This year, I'm having a whole lot of problems finding propagules on Sanibel and in San Carlos Bay. We're actually looking at Estero because Estero has more seedling production. Their trees aren't as stressed out, right? Because if your tree has used all of its energy or has lost a part of its body, then it can't reproduce. It doesn't have as much energy to create seedlings. So that's also a huge impact after these hurricanes, is that they need that time to both to regrow their leaves and then gain enough energy to reproduce in future years. Okay, so last fall, our most recent research with mangroves at the SCCF Marine Lab is working in satellite ground truthing. So essentially, when we talk about blue carbon, we're talking about the carbon that is stored underground, so in the mangrove roots. When you look above, right, you can kind of quantify this amount of carbon. You can take a satellite and you can say, well, it's really green and the canopy is really dense and we don't see a lot of the ground through it, and you can see the reflection off these leaves, right? They do it all with different colors and it's very complicated and they have great computer programs. But that doesn't quantify what's happening down here, right? So essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to advance technology that allows us to recognize, quantify the root carbon stocks of mangrove forests and other forests around the world. This allows us to take satellites and actually look at what is happening in really remote areas and then see what is actually happening after these storms, look at remote places like the 10,000 Islands, areas where we can't necessarily get scientists out to look at everything, get it done faster, get it done right after those storms and actually see what's going on. So this is their vegetation health index. So this is some of their initial studies before we ground truth it. So ground truthing is essentially taking what they think. So they have this, they already have the software developed and they say, this is what the software says that it should be based on what we have. But then we go out there and we take our soil cores, and they can quantify the carbon that's in there, and they can say whether their technology is actually effective or not, and then they can change it, right? They're kind of working with what they have and kind of modifying it based on what we give them. So we have all these you see these little worms of sites. So essentially, these are all gradients that their technology has given them that says that there should be a gradient here and here and here of carbon stock in the mangrove forest. And what we go in and do is we go in and we take these soil cores and then we send them off to a lab and they say, with this size, with this depth soil core, this X number of this is carbon and X amount of this is not carbon, and they can see and kind of ground truth their data. So that's why we do a lot of tromping around in mangrove forest. It's because you literally have to go through a straight line, find the exact dot that they give you, and take that soil core and then send it off to a lab in Colorado to get that carbon stock. We really like all of our labs around the US because we don't all want to buy our own technology. That's really expensive. So we all collaborate on it, which is great. In these, that's really interesting. You can see propagule collection in this NDVI. So this is the health structure of the forest. You can see right here, this is when your propagules come out every year. So it's actually showing that they're reflecting up more. They're saying that the forest is healthier. And then it goes down, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. This will give you a median line. And then you can see right here at Ian where it goes down, and then we have a recovery as it goes up. So that's essentially what they're looking for, is to create this, but a more accurate version so that we can actually see what's going on and create replanting plans, create any kind of adaptation plans that we need as far as policy, as far as our economic, situation, everything. Okay, so Coastal Watch Mangrove Restoration, heading away from the Marine Lab. So it starts with propagule collection. Every step of our restoration programs involves volunteers. So we have a whole bunch of great volunteers that go out to the beaches and boat ramps and canals, and they help us collect mangrove propagules. Now, because red mangroves are fringing, we usually use them in our adopt a mangrove program, because they can take a lot of different stresses, right? They can take drought, they can take flooding, they can take a kid shaking it during its lunch break, like everything. They can take a whole lot of abuse. We usually do this program from August to October, but now it's more like August to November/December/ the program is so popular that we may be collecting propagules for the rest of our lives, which is amazing. And so then we bring them into our mangrove nursery, and every Friday we are out here, and I think a lot of my volunteers who come help on Fridays are here. But then we also have Sanibel C school kids and some SGCU students. And what we do is we pot them in 1 gallon pots that then we can loan out to the community, and they can grow them on their own and bring them back in a few months and have a more grown mangrove plant. So this little guy is ready to be adopted out. When he comes back, he'll be about this tall. And what we're really looking for is root growth, right? We really want something that we can plant in a site, and it will already have that stability of the root growth, and it can start growing immediately and have enough hold that it can grow on really stressed islands, right? We're planting right now in ding islands, like the rookery islands, like Black Skimmer and Givney. These islands are getting a ton of wave action, and because their mangroves have died off so much, what would happen historically is that these islands would break down and fall apart, and they'd become oyster reefs, right? But we don't have the extra space to allow that to happen and allow new islands to form, or new parts of the land, or Ding Darling, or our barrier islands to become smaller rookery islands. So what we do is we go out to those islands, we say, I should actually go over here. We say, we don't have the capacity and the buffer in Southwest Florida right now to allow these islands to collapse and allow new areas to become rookery islands and be that habitat for those animals. So we go out and we literally, by force of will, bring these islands back. And we do it all with these little mangroves grown with the Adopt a Mangrove program. Now, we were lucky enough this year to be recognized by the New York Times. They came out on a planting and came and talked to a lot of our Adopt a Mangrove parents, which was really cool. And it was nationally recognized, which is amazing. Right now, we've got a lot of businesses that are participating in the program. This gets the word out to a lot of the tourists that are coming out. They then know that we as Sanibelians are directly impacting the restoration that is going on here. It's not something that's separate from us. It's something that is going on in our homes, in our kitchens, in our businesses, in our backyards. We are directly adding to these restoration projects in every aspect of our lives. Here we can see our very ambitious volunteer, Gary. Gary's still here? Hey. So Gary actually built a pool in his backyard, a spa, I'm so sorry, a mangrove spa to grow his mangrove propagules. How many propagule parents do we have out here today? Yes, that's wonderful. Okay, so if you're jealous of the people who just raised their hands, we do have some mangroves available for anybody to take home. I think we have about 40 today. So I think that should be enough to cover the people who didn't raise their hands. And then we also have a sign up sheet. So if you do want to take a mangrove, please put your email, your name. This allows us to tell you the dates for return in the spring or the fall. We have a lot of people who get really ambitious and they want to keep them for a full year, which is great. It means that they get really, really big. And we love this, but some people do leave in the spring. So we have those return dates in the spring as well as the fall. And then we also are doing something really cool this year where we did a little bit of a trial last year, but we're doing special planting specifically for Adopt a Mangrove participants. So this means that we'll have shifts and people can come during their shift. You can plant your, if you have your one mangrove that you've been taking care of meticulously for 4 months, you can take it to your spot in the restoration site. You can find the perfect spot that speaks to you and your mangrove where it's going to be the happiest, and you can put it in that spot, and then you can come back and you can visit it and you can actually see it happen and you can be a part of that. And these are trees, right? So if you get a good spot, you can actually come back for years and decades and see your tree grow. Now, I will say with mangrove plantings, we do see a lot of die off because they are high stress areas. This is why we grow them in our nursery as well. And we do have participants like Gary growing many, 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 so that it makes all the rest of us feel a little bit better when we grow one. And some years your one is lost, and that's really, really sad. But it does happen, and that's just the way it is in Florida, and that's the way it is in life. Sometimes try as hard as you can, but you've got to try again next year because it doesn't always work. But that's why we keep on at it, and we are a very stubborn species, the human species, right? So that's what we need to combat this growing problem and actually protect our islands, is that stubbornness that we have in all the rest of life. We need to add that to our restoration as well.
God, you need GPS chips.
GPS chips, in Madagascar, they're doing bracelets, planting bracelets. So whenever you plant one, you click on your little bracelet that you planted one, and it's right there. What I do is I take out a Trimble, so it's like a little GPS that's super accurate, to the 0.003 centimeter, and I'll go to each plant, and then I'll go to each plant, and it takes me 2 hours at restoration site. And I'll record where they are, and that means that we can come back and see not specifically the individuals, but where in the area of the restoration site they have survived, where they've thrived, and then we can mimic that in the future. These projects are really they're not a one and done situation, right? You have to come back year after year after year, and we have to be stewards of our islands and stewards of these restoration sites and really take care of them, because you want that intense gratification immediately, but we are stewards of our lands. That's how it's traditionally been. And we're learning that again, and we're getting better and better at being consistent year after year and actually taking care of these wonderful mangrove forests and bringing back our areas. This is Woodring Road. They've actually put in a living shoreline with these oyster balls. They kind of look like cat toys, but they're made partially of oyster shell. And this allows the oyster reef to grow right here, and then also a wave buffer. We get a tremendous amount of wave action from the ICW coming in. So we have our living shoreline buffer right here. We have our mangrove trees. You can tell the forest is not super thick. It's died off tremendously. And then we grow these little plants along. This one needs some friends. And then we also pair plant. So when we do these plantings, we also plant purslane, and we're trying to work with saltwort, but saltwort doesn't love the nursery. So it's all a calculation. And then, we as SCCF are the largest private landowner on Sanibel Island. We also own York Island, where we do a lot of restoration as well. So we are lucky to have these lands that we can go out and, have these great impacts on. Okay, do we have any questions? I might drink a little bit of water before the questions.
Thank you, that was great.
Of course, thank you.
Seeing this map, this is good to see here. Can you talk about places, on the rest of Sanibel, other than around Big Darling, you know, the condition of the mangroves, and do you have any plans for planting more mangroves on Sanibel? So.
Yeah, we have some active restoration sites. I wonder, can I zoom into this? Or does it? Okay, here we go, here we go. The contrast isn't super good, but most people can see this, right? So we've got Woodring Road right here. This is actually city lands that we're planting on. But we're working on protecting this layer right here. This is an active restoration site. So if I have a group that reaches out to me and says that they've been, you know, studying mangroves and growing mangroves, and they want to bring their 100 mangroves out and plant them in a restoration site, I'll bring them to a place like Woodring Road. We'll find spots that look like the mangroves will be successful, and then we'll plant those there. Well, we do tend to pack these sites pretty full because we do have a lot of die-off in places like Woodring Road because it's getting so much energy from right here. That we tend to pack them super full so that they can grow that root mat as quickly as possible. And then they don't tend to outcompete each other. Anybody who has lived up north, you can see the traditional mangrove or traditional forest of hardwood trees. It's kind of like your chairs, right? They're all evenly spaced out. This is because of competition, because they know that they'll have to compete for canopy space. Mangroves aren't like this. They will find opportunistically the right area that they want to be. They are not limited by growing straight up. They are not limited by growing upwards. Sometimes they grow sideways, and they are perfectly happy to have a friend to grow in and around and all together with. Which means that we can really put them in really tight, and they actually grow better. We're finding, we've got one research project by an intern over at Woodring Road. We're finding the denser we're planting them, they're actually surviving much better. Then we have up by Clam Bayou, this is where that cut through was after the storms in the fall. They put a berm there, the city did. They will be planting this in dune plants, but we've also planted it in mangroves on the bayou side. We're seeing recruitment already. So natural recruitment is when the mangrove trees in the area have seeded, and those seeds have actually taken hold in that restoration site. So we're hoping it's going to be a hugely successful site, and we're just gonna keep pumping it with mangroves. So those are two big main restoration sites right now. We also have Skimmer, which I can't quite tell which one's Skimmer right now, and then Give Me, and a few other rookery islands that we are discussing with a ding darling to get planted up, because those rookeries are so important for the birds. We can't let them collapse.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
On the core that you take, the dirt core,
Yeah,
so they can analyze it.
yeah.
It seems like that core would be really old if you're going 4 foot deep. That they really only need the top portion of it. Or does the carbon that they're testing for, does it weep down through the whole core itself, or how do they, calculate the carbon in the core, and then how do they relate that to their?
So the satellite LiDAR imagery, whatever they're doing, is much more complicated than I can explain right now, because I do not have a satellite technology brain. But they do create those gradients. What would actually be best is if we were able to take a core that was long enough that we could actually reach the bottom of the root mass, so we could actually see the entirety of these roots. Because everything that's in this root mass, every piece of organic material right here, is the carbon being stored by those mangrove roots. So what they do is, in simplistic terms, you essentially wash the sand away and you wash the dirt away and you keep your carbon storage. So you keep these roots and then you quantify them. Why you need that really intense technology is that you also have to take the water out. And then you need to quantify that as well. And usually that's done with volume instead of weight, and it gets super complicated, which is why we're really happy that Colorado does that for us and we don't have to do it ourselves.
Another question on Woodridge Road where you
Yeah.
landed, and then you come down again, and then it turns kind of left.
Oh, yeah.
You go down on the right hand side, there's that pool there.
Yeah.
Is that one of the areas where it's real high salt? 'Cause it doesn't clear out with the tide, and there's nothing growing in there. Is that one of those high salt areas?
So that's an area where, yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's where the sand has come up and created a little bit more of a berm, and it can literally just be a few inches that keeps those big tides from flushing that out, and then it'll kill the plants in the area. It literally can just be a few inches of sand that causes those trees to die off. Again, that's a completely natural process, and it would happen historically, and it would happen everywhere, and that land would just change and go through a regeneration and have that opportunity to change up what it's going through, kind of like, you know, I grew up as a farmer in West Virginia, so I always thinking of it as crop rotations, right? Historically, you kind of do that with ecosystems sometimes, where your ecosystem will break down and it'll become something different, and then maybe it'll change back to something else. Not everything in Florida is supposed to be like the redwoods, where it's the same thing for hundreds and hundreds of years. Usually they do change and they evolve, and nothing stays the same on islands, right? But the challenge is when it also is compounded with human impacts, right? With houses and roads that are also keeping that water in. And it's really hard to say what would have happened in areas like that if we didn't have the road and if we didn't have houses, and if there would have been some back creek or something flushing out the backside of that mangrove forest. I will say some of that is our land. I think most of that is Ding's land. I think that they do have plans, and I don't want to spoil their plans for them. But hopefully they'll tell us what those plans are soon. I think they're gonna do some research and maybe some restoration back there.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I was a mangrove mama, and I know my mangroves out there somewhere thriving. But I'm curious, this is probably an old question, curious about as you approach the causeway and the toll wheels and all of that stuff to the right.
Mhm.
And what is that and what's happening to it?
Oh, so that's an area that is not experiencing flushing. Ooh. So that's actually right here. And then if we go over here, sorry, I'm gonna make you all seasick. Oh, we can't see it, or no, it's right there. So essentially what has happened in that area is it has historically been channeled. So they were gonna build houses right here. So there's like right here, there's a channel. You can see it on a better satellite. And then you also have a road, and then you also have buildings, right? So this part that's right next to the road is just far enough. You can see back in there where the green is starting again. That's essentially where those channels were dug, and where there's enough water that it didn't get super saline. So it would just stay just enough that some of those trees back there died, and some of them survived, and they're actually seeing a lot of recruitment farther back. And it's actually, it's kind of sad funny, not haha funny, but sad funny, that our property, literally the line of it is right before that natural recruitment starts, because it's close enough to the road that without the road, it would have gotten that wave, and it would have gotten flushing, and it would have created trenches down to the beach with the excess water. But because the road is built up and up and up and up and up, there's no flushing coming in. So that's why we see that really intense salinity increase there, is because that water is just sitting on those mangroves, and it makes it really challenging for us to plant there, because we could wait a few rainy seasons and wait for that soil to release the salinity that's still stored in it and for the water to get flushed a little bit through rain. But then if we have another surge, if and when, the water will just sit on it again and most of what we plant will probably die. So it's definitely a challenge figuring out. There are a lot of mangrove scientists that don't believe in replanting. They believe that your hydrology should be determining your restoration. So if your hydrology is correct in an area should be naturally recruiting itself. Now, a lot of that is a fallacy because a lot of or at least in Florida, because a lot of the mangrove research done around the world is done in places without these intense storms. So they have that time to recruit and they don't have these big natural disasters coming through. We are able to plant in areas where they were so destroyed that they don't have that seed production and they don't have enough big trees to create more seedlings as fast as we need them to before our next storm comes. So it's difficult, but in places like that, it is a hydrology issue. It's not a seed source issue.
Hi, Gary Coker here. Thanks for the great presentation.
Thanks,
As
Gary.
always. The weir system, I have no idea what I'm after.
Okay.
But the weir system on Sanibel, is there something in state law that prevents them from opening it during rainstorm to flush out that inland water?
That is a wonderful question for Mark, our weir specialist. And he does give presentations specifically on the weir system. He does research for the city of Sanibel, and they talk specifically about this. They just made some big decisions on what our weirs would be doing in the next few years and what they might change into. I think that those meeting notes are probably available online. I don't know about large rainstorms, but I will say during a surge event, if you have a 6-foot storm surge, it will be high above where your weir is, and it has no chance of doing anything unless you want to build the Great Wall of China around Sanibel. A storm surge is going to do what a storm surge is going to do.
I have a second one,
Gary, you were in the nursery on Friday.
and I don't get to keep any of it. The next question has to do with the land, West Gulf and Tarpon Bay Road. Just because I go past that 3 times a day. What's going on there? I mean, all of those mangroves are dead, or most of them are, and that's SCCF property, I believe.
A lot of those are buttonwoods too. And a lot of that land is supposed to be Spartina marsh. What we've done on Sanibel is we're an island that was created by a series of ridges and swales. And the Sanibel Slough is supposed to turn into the Sanibel River once a year and outflush through Beach Road, but then they built Beach Road and it kind of messed with the entire hydrology of the island. And then they decided to build a few more roads that directly went through where our water is supposed to be moving. That's why we do have the weir systems, and we do have our different methods for water movement that we aid with. But we have completely changed the way water is supposed to move on this island, and it means that we've changed the way that our plants are growing. And when we do mess with the weirs, we are also messing with the water level and what is able to grow where. So we do get these funny situations where, one year our buttonwoods grow up great in an area, and then we get a wet year and they die off, and our spartina does great. And it means that we have these really funny conditions, and we don't have that consistency that we really need to be able to do that long-term restoration. Now that is something that, as scientists and as community members and as a city, we work towards getting that perfect balance and figuring that out. But there are areas and because we own so much land, it is sometimes on SCCF land that we see those funky sites that are in transition periods.
Hi, great presentation. I have
Thank
3
you.
questions. So, the one is, can anything be planted on McGregor, or because the saltiness, is it just gonna kind of resolve itself and whatever comes back, comes back?
You know, I did the vegetation survey there and we have some white mangroves and some black mangroves naturally seeding themselves. It's hard to say what will grow, and we are working with different organizations and the DEP to talk about what might grow there and what might grow well there. But it is hard to put resources into something that you may not, may not be successful. So it may be that we do a nice little science experiment and we figure out different plants that will grow in that area that look much different than what was there previously.
That makes sense. And then the next one is, so you said of the tropicals that end up on the beach, that's only 0.1% of the ones that the rest of them are probably actually growing and seeding. And there's times when we've been out where we've seen, seems like hundreds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So mangroves have tons and tons of propagules, and the ones that survive are usually below the canopy. So that's that 99.99 is the ones that survive, that seed, are usually right below the canopy of their parent plant. The dispersal method of going through the water column is actually a survival mechanism to disperse DNA to different areas. And that's why you see so much die-off and loss on the beaches, is because it's such a small percentage that leaves that canopy of the parent tree and is successful. They have to put out so many propagules to be able to spread their DNA and continue as a species successfully.
Okay, and I know you've asked for people to pick them up at times, so there
Yes.
is that kind of, are there seasonal when they're out there, should we be picking them up? Because there's times when it seems like there's a lot of them, but I don't know whether you are collecting them or want them.
I always want them. I always want them, and I would love if they were green. And if the one end is very green and one end is very brown and the whole thing is not brown, because when the whole thing is brown, it will not do anything. But if it's very, very green and it's firm like a green bean, I really like it, and I would love if you would collect them for me. And that would be amazing. You can bring them to the Bailey Homestead, or you can bring them to the SCCF headquarters building where the old nature center was.
And how do you want them stored in the meantime? How do you want them stored in the meantime between the beach where you pick them up and where you're giving them?
Yeah, so you can put them brown side down in some water, or you can put them in, some people bring them in grocery bags if they know they're not going to be there for a super long time, and they tend to have a little bit of moisture in there. And then if you just keep them in a cool, not sunny spot, please don't put them in a plastic bag and then keep them in your car all day and then bring them in. Because they won't be very happy with you. It tends to be seed rules, right? Make sure your seeds are moist, dark until you're ready to plant them. Do we have any more questions? Ed. What's up, Ed?
My name's Ed Logan. I've been for Skye McDonald out on Fridays, but let me go back to 2018 when I moved here, and that was I thought red tide was the only challenge when I moved here. And it was a good challenge, but one of the things I was fortunate to do too is I joined the city vegetation committee. Okay, they have plant walks, so if you didn't get enough mangroves now, look in the paper, look at the city things, go to the plant walks too, because there's people there that know mangroves and all that sort of thing. The city's actually planted all kinds of native plants in the back. And when you're on the vegetation committee, you would have to take the exam that the contractors have to take, which I guess now you don't have to take that anymore because some of the federal guys or state guys says, but you have to be smarter than the contractor. So you can get on the budget, you can get on work for SCCF, you can join COTI. You've got the vegetation committee. I mean, a lot of resources. You go to a vegetation committee meeting, there's probably 50 years experience just sitting right on the stage. So I encourage you to go there, go to the plant walks. And let me see if I remember. So I did have to take this as an exam. So it's red with a pointy head, black,
Salty back.
white, All the time. That's Bruce Brooks back there. You'll see her, Adam. That got me through the exam. So, anyway, man, this is great, man. This was super. So everybody, some of you got badges, some of you didn't. If there's no number on the back, you want a mangrove. If you don't have no badge, you want a mangrove. And I'll give it to my friend.
And have a meeting back.
He's so glad. Oh, and we need board members too, because he kicked me off.
Thank you, Ed. But most of all, thank you, Skye. Please join me in the audience. They know a lot more than I did. We'll see what I've forgotten by tomorrow, but today we're
That's
doing
okay,
good.
10%, we always look
That's
for
good.
10%.
No, I like that 99 point, whatever that was. Anyhow, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you all for coming. Looks like we still have some food and maybe something to drink back there, so you're welcome to stay a bit longer and mingle and chat with one another. And don't know exactly when the next COTI conversation will be, but when it is, you'll be the second to know. That's how it is. Thanks very much. Take care.